Welcome to Airmanship 2.0 case study number 11, Not Enough Oomph. I'm Dave Cook, the Executive Director of the Center for Airmanship Excellence, and I'm going to be working with you this evening on this case study. So thanks for coming. So I'm sure you've already noticed this is a PowerPoint presentation, but no sleeping, because you're going to get a Wings program credit, a knowledge credit for attending. Your attendance is automatically recorded on the GoToWebinar system, and after the webinar, probably tomorrow or the next day, I'll give you all credit for attending. So in a day or two, you'll be able to see this knowledge credit in your Wings file. Sponsors of the webinar this evening, the FAA Safety Team, I'm a safety rep, and the Center for Airmanship Excellence. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes here before we get into the case study this evening and see who we have on the webinar with us. So if you'd like to answer one or more of these questions for us, please raise your hand. You should see a little raise your hand icon, and I'll open up your mic. So I'm just browsing through now the roster of the folks who are here. And I don't see any hands up yet, so I'll run through one more time. If I don't see any hands up, I'll just select someone randomly so we just get a little idea. Oh, here we go. I'm going to open up Robert Nebgen. Robert, are you there? Okay, Robert, I don't hear anything. I'm going to close your mic. Rolf Scholes. Rolf, are you there? How do you read me, Rolf? Okay, I've got some audio, but it wasn't very good. So I'm going to close Rolf's mic and see if anybody else has their hand up. This happens periodically. Everybody looking up Carrie Drake's mic. Carrie, are you there? Okay, I'm getting some static, but I'm not getting anything from Carrie. All right, I'm going to try Matthew Recupito. Matthew, do you hear me?
I do. Do you hear me?
Hey, loud and clear, Matthew. Yeah, this is a problem. I'll tell you up front, all of you folks attending this evening, that we've had repeatedly with this system, in that we sometimes get feedback. We sometimes don't get people connected. But go ahead, Matthew, and if you wouldn't mind answering one or more of these questions, I appreciate it.
Yeah. I fly single-engine Cessnas, 172s, 182s. There's also a 172 RG. Home aerodromes between Eagle Creek and Metropolitan, both airports in the Indianapolis area, and actually haven't been flying in the past couple months, but before that I had averaged, I'd say, about 40 hours a year.
Oh, very good. All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. How about David Zitz? David, are you there? All right. Stand by. Okay, Dave Zitz. Dave, are you there? Okay, I guess he's not going to open up his mic. Dave? All right, well, it looks like we have a lot of shy people on here this evening. Nobody wants to share this with us, so we'll go ahead and move forward, putting everybody's hands down. Thank you for sharing that with us, though. And before we get into the main case study this evening, I've got a bonus case study for you. From the Airmanship 2.0 perspective. Now, again, that's why we're looking at these case studies. If you haven't been through the Airmanship 2.0 briefings at airmanshipexcellence.org, this perspective on the case study may not make a lot of sense to you without that background. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of perspective here on Airmanship 2.0, and I'm going to do it this evening in the form of a bonus case study. Now, this case study stems from an audio problem that we had at the last webinar, case study number 10, where we lost audio about 3/4 of the way through the webinar. And if you've attended one of these before, you know that one of the things we do in the webinars is we practice identifying links in error chains. As you probably have heard, every accident is preceded by a chain of errors that are linked together to result in the accident. And I've heard it said that there are 3 to 5 links in every error chain. We've had a couple of case studies where we've identified many more than that, 10, 11, 12 links in error chains, so they can get quite long. But the whole idea is to identify links in the error chain that may lead to an accident, and then either remove the links or mitigate the risk so that it's acceptable. So one of the big parts of Airmanship 2.0 that we haven't talked a whole lot about before in this series of webinars is safety management systems. Every Airmanship 2.0 culture has a safety management system in it. So let's take a quick look at what that is. This is all part of Airmanship 2.0 and safety. Safety management systems really are the result of a secret recipe, if you will. Number 1 is to collect data. Number 2 is analyze the data. Number 3 is to identify hazards. 4 is to devise a fix. 5 is to implement the fix. 6 is to monitor the results. And then the 7th ingredient is to repeat if necessary. So let's use this framework from Airmanship 2.0 to look at this case study. First of all, data collection on that loss of audio. I collected data by emails. Those of you who were, some of those of you on the webinar sent me emails saying that they lost audio partway through. I received a couple of phone messages. And, of course, a lot of people raised their hands after they lost the audio, and that's another viable way to alert me to something's wrong, except that I have to open up the attendee list and then scroll through it, as I mentioned, to see the raised hands. So I eventually get to that. In fact, that's how we caught it. So I collected all that data, and then I also studied the system, the GoToWebinar system, to see what the problem was. Next step, as you recall, in a safety management system is data analysis. So I crunched all that data and I looked at the system, as I mentioned. And here you can see a screenshot of what I see in my control panel. You all have a smaller version of this on your screen, or you should. But here's my icon to tell me my mic is hot. Right there, that little green square with the white mic in it. The here's another screenshot that shows me that mic icon when I have it muted. So it's not green now, it's gray. So it doesn't catch your attention. Pretty poor engineering in my opinion. When I have it muted, it's only gray and it doesn't catch my attention so that I know that I've done that. So number 3 then, since we've analyzed the data, is to identify the hazard. The hazard is that I mute the mic button to clear my throat or take a sip of water, and I forget to open it back up again, and so we have lost comm. Everybody's saying, say again, and it was due to pilot error. So we're going to devise a fix, working through our safety management system here. And the fix that I've decided to try is what I call the good old 3-holer trick. 727, the Boeing 3-holer. I flew these for United Airlines starting in 1968, started out on this airplane as a second officer, and that's where I reached back in my memory bank, my Airmanship 2.0 bag of tricks, and pulled this one out, this fix that I'm devising here for this hazard that we've identified. Here's a nice cockpit shot of a 727. The red arrow is pointing to the flap handle. Here's a nice shot of the flight engineer, second officer panel on the 727. And there have a couple of components here that are part of this problem hazard / solution. These 2 switches are air conditioning pack switches, and attached to those air conditioning pack switches are cooling fans that are activated if those switches are on anytime the flap handle is moved from the 0 or the full up position. So anytime you start to extend the flaps, those air conditioning pack cooling fans come on, and they are tremendous users of electricity, take a lot of power. So if we lost a generator on the 727, the procedure called for us to turn one of those switches off before we extended the flaps. If we lost 2 generators, procedures called for us to turn both switches off before we extended the pack so that the cooling fans wouldn't come on. So that was a real easy thing to forget. You might lose a generator at the beginning of a flight. You fly a long flight. Now you've got to remember to turn off those air conditioning pack switches before you extend the flaps. So what we did to remediate that hazard was over the flap handle, we would put a coffee cup, just a paper coffee cup, upside down over the flap handle. And then whoever was going to be extending the flaps on that particular leg knew if they reached for them to extend them, they'd find the coffee cup, and then they would remind the second officer to turn the air conditioning pack switches off. So it worked very effectively. I don't know who came up with this one first, but it was taught to us in recurrent training, actually initial, then recurrent. We all used it on the airplane, as far as I know, as our gouge whenever we were handling a loss of generator situation. And of course, the big thing was to make sure you have those pack switches off. So the fix that I've devised here, because I'm trying to keep myself from leaving the mic muted if I do mute it for some reason, I've decided to place in front of my monitor this excuse me, Airmanship Challenge Completion Award that I happen to have here in my office. So whenever I have it muted, I just place this in front of the monitor, and then I should hopefully not miss that when I'm going to speak again and open up the mic. All right, well, the next step is to implement the fix. So that's what we're doing this evening. I've got my Airmanship Challenge Completion Award here in front of me, and I'm going to put it in front of my monitor whenever I mute the mic. And now the next step in the safety management system is to monitor the results. So you folks are the monitors, and again, if you have a problem, you don't hear anything for a while, please click on that raise your hand icon. You can email me or send me or call me if you're not hearing anything. So that's how a safety management system works under Airmanship 2.0, and we can use that same system in our flying to keep us safer and to make it easier for us. A couple other things I want to tell you about Airmanship 2.0 briefly before we get into it, into the case study this evening, is I want to point out that we always use the Kern Airmanship model when we're talking about Airmanship 2.0. In fact, the Kern Airmanship model is the prism through which we view Airmanship 2.0. Another way to look at Airmanship 2.0 in the Kern Airmanship model is to look at each one of the elements in the model. And here we can see we have 3 bedrock principles: flight discipline, skill, and proficiency. We have 5 pillars of knowledge: knowledge of self, aircraft, team, knowledge of environment, and knowledge of risk. And upon those 5 pillars of knowledge rest the desired outcomes, the capstone outcomes of situational awareness and judgment. So really, the Kern Airmanship model is the scaffold upon which we build our airmanship skills and capabilities. Another way to look at Airmanship 2.0 is that it's doing it right. It's flying right. It's doing all the things that should be done to make the flight enjoyable, more rewarding, and safer. Another big part of Airmanship 2.0, and actually you're kind of participating in an element of that this evening, is a continuous airmanship development plan. Every pilot who practices Airmanship 2.0 has a continuous airmanship development plan by which they can obviously continuously improve their airmanship. And I like to quote Vince Lombardi here. He said, "Perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence." And that's what we're after here, to be excellent airmen. And I mentioned you're actually participating in a continuous airmanship development plan by attending the Wings Program briefings, because the Wings Program, the proficiency program, is a big part, or should be a big part, of everyone's continuous airmanship development plan. Airmanship 2.0 is the kind of airmanship that's being practiced right now at the airlines and at the military. So it isn't really all that new. I trace it back to the early 1980s. I was flying for United then, and I was involved actually in introducing the beginnings of Airmanship 2.0. We call it Command Leadership Resource Management Training at United. We were the first major airline to implement that sort of thing, commonly referred to as CRM, Crew Resource Management. That's part of it. But it's also the culture, the safety culture that is at the airline or in the military operation. It's the attitude the pilots have, and it's that continuous airmanship development plan. A lot of other things fit into Airmanship 2.0, but it is being practiced right now, has been practiced for many years, about 30 years or so, at the airlines and the military. And all we're talking about here is adapting the Airmanship 2.0 used at the airlines and the military for us personal flyers, so we can use it. Now, again, that's just the tip of the iceberg, a real quick flyby of what Airmanship 2.0 is. I hope it gives you a little perspective so that this case study analysis will be a little more valuable for you. But I would encourage you to go to the Center for Airmanship Excellence website at airmanshipexcellence.org and go into the subweb of Airmanship 2.0 by clicking on that button right there that's by the arrow. And everything you want to know about Airmanship 2.0 is there. So if you find this interesting, an interesting way to approach flying, I'd encourage you to find out more about it. All right. Does anyone at this point, before we launch into the case study for this evening, have any questions or comments? And I'm going to take just a moment to open up my roster, and please raise your hand if you have a question or comment. Okay, I'm scrolling through. I don't see anybody that raised hands, so we got everybody's either asleep or satisfied or shy this evening. And please, interaction helps a lot. All righty, we'll move on. And again, this is case study number 11 in the series, Not Enough Oomph. In this case study, we'll examine an airmanship-related accident that could have been prevented if the pilot had been practicing Airmanship 2.0. Now, again, we're not pointing fingers at this particular pilot or anyone else. This is the approach we take. Mistakes are the portals of discovery. You've all heard this many, many times. We have to learn from others' mistakes because there's so many mistakes that can be made. There's no way we're going to survive making them all. And I know that's why you're attending the webinar this evening. And again, I want to refocus you here. We're going to practice identifying those links in the error chain and talk about how we would either remove or mitigate the risks associated with those links. And that's all part of Airmanship 2.0. This case study is based on the NTSB preliminary report of the accident and a blog posting by a ABC15.com reporter shortly after the accident. The accident took place on June 11th, 2010, so about 2 years ago now. Accident aircraft was a Piper PA-2832R-300, which my research tells me was a short model run that was named the Piper Cherokee Lance. Now, some of you who know a lot more about these Indian-type airplanes might be able to tell me that that's not accurate, but that was what I was able to find in my research. It was owned by the pilot. It was a Part 91 operation. No flight plan was filed on the accident flight. There were 4 fatalities, all occupants of the aircraft, the pilot, and 3 passengers. The accident pilot was ATF Special Agent Jeffrey Ulrich. He was 50 years old. He had a private certificate with an instrument rating. 3rd class medical, 1.5 to 2 years before the accident issued then. He had a restriction not valid for night flying. Not valid for night flying, daytime only. He had 2,150 plus hours, so he's an experienced aviator. 5.7 hours in the previous 30 days and 34.4 hours in the previous 90 days. So I would, from that particular information, assume that he was fairly proficient in the normal flying of his airplane. Passengers: his wife Ronnie, who was aged 47, daughter Alexa, age 15, and daughter Carly, age 5. The aircraft, as I mentioned, was PA-32R-300. The N number was 7699er Foxtrot. Was manufactured in 1977, so it was 33 years old at the time of the crash. Total airframe hours, 4,389, so it was getting up there, relatively speaking. Had a Lycoming IO 540, 300 horsepower, so it had a lot of horses. The engine had been overhauled just 155.6 hours prior to the accident. So the engine, engines can be a problem no matter what they're like, where they are in the life cycle, but this one at least was fairly fresh out of overhaul. The overall flight, aeronautical odyssey they were engaged upon here when the accident took place was they departed Ocala, Florida on June 10th and flew up to Meridian, Mississippi for a fuel stop. Then they flew on over to Frederick, Oklahoma, and remained overnight in Frederick. The next morning they flew over to Wichita Falls. Nothing in the information, the accident report indicates why they did that, short hop over to Wichita Falls. And then they flew out to Springerville, Arizona. That was all on June 11th. They arrived in Springerville about midday. They were going to continue on up to the Grand Canyon. So total distance from Ocala out to the Grand Canyon, 1,650 nautical miles, 12.5 hours flying time. I would imagine this was a long-planned family trip, taking the kids out to the Grand Canyon. What a way to see it. What a way to see the country. I imagine they were just having a really good time when they arrived in Springerville for that fuel stop. Just take a little closer look at the airport, Springerville, where the accident occurred. You can see there's 2 runways at Springerville. This is runway 321, nice long runway. Had 8,422 feet, paved, good condition. 0.5% downslope, so a good runway to use. However, it was NOTAM closed at the time of the accident. The other runway there, 1129, it was much shorter, only 4,603 feet, and it had an upslope of 0.2%. Now that might not sound like much, but when performance is important, any upslope is a major detriment to performance. You might also note that the airport elevation here, at least the runway end elevation, 7,032 feet, so they're up there pretty good. On the turnaround there at Springerville, the records indicate that the pilot took on from a self-serve pump 76.4 gallons of 100 low lead. The aircraft held 98 gallons maximum, so that's pretty close, I would think, if he was topped off before he left Wichita Falls, and he had 20 gallons or so left there. 22 gallons is about right. A couple hours flying time, good margin. But he more than likely topped it off the way the NTSB figures it here. But they did have the record, and they added 76.4 gallons. They did check the fuel. It was free of contaminants, so that wasn't the problem. The NTSB determined that the aircraft weight at departure was 3,392 pounds, and the weight and balance was within limitations. It was close to max gross. I think max was 3,600 pounds, but it wasn't at max, and it was in balance. The weather at the time of the Springerville turnaround at Delta 68, that's Springerville, 1350 local time. It was recorded by an AWOS 3. Visibility 10 miles. Temperature 77 degrees Fahrenheit, so not terribly hot for Arizona in the summertime, but that is pretty high, 7,000 feet. I used to live in Tucson. I lived a couple thousand feet up, and it got hot in the summertime, even up at that altitude, but here's 77. The wind was from 170 degrees at 24, gusting 31. Remember, he's using runway 11. Altimeter 2999. Density altitude 9,700 feet. The runway 11 crosswind component was computed by the NTSB to be 25 to 32 knots. That's the crosswind component. It had a tailwind component. Most of the time, it was gusting around, but most of the time it had a 4 to 5 knot tailwind component. So remember, you had that upslope on that runway. Now he's got a tailwind on the runway and a really ferocious crosswind to deal with on that runway. Must have been an interesting landing if he used 11 like he should have. The NOTAM said there was construction being done on the other runway, so I would assume he landed on 1-1. But we know that his takeoff was on 1-1 on this accident flight. All right, there were several witnesses to the accident. Witness number 1 was a pilot at the airport. He saw the airplane departing runway 11. And the quote was, "He used more runway than used by most of the other small aircraft during takeoff." The witness stated that after takeoff, the airplane was rocking side to side and appeared to be having trouble gaining altitude. This is a real strong indication that he was flying in ground effect and couldn't get out of it. The witness further reported that the airplane gained altitude, then lost altitude 3 or 4 times. Another good indicator that he was struggling to get out of ground effect. Numerous witnesses, also in addition to the pilot on the airport, they were located near the accident site, observed the accident airplane flying at low altitude toward the Round Valley High School. And you can see here on the map under the A, oops, I'm sorry, I have to hit the button, there we go. The A is the Round Valley High School location. So here was his route of flight roughly after he took off from 1-1, came on over here. Here's a little closer satellite view of the Round Valley High School. He flew that distance over there and then initially hit a tree on the campus of the high school, and then crashed into the high school itself, the building, and caught on fire, started a fire in the building that burned for almost 24 hours. Post-crash analysis, the NTSB interviewed a witness that said he was located within the courtyard area of the high school, and he reported that he heard the sound of an airplane. And then he looked up and observed the accident airplane flying over his position at an altitude of no more than 30 feet in a level attitude. The witness stated that he ducked for cover and subsequently heard the sound of the airplane impact the side of the school building. The witness said that the engine was wound up and seemed to be running strong. Second witness reported that while driving south on Main Street, about 0.2 miles west of the high school, she heard and subsequently saw a small white airplane fly over her position to the east at a very low altitude. The witness stated that the airplane appeared to be losing altitude very fast as it flew over her position, and that it did not sound like the engine was sputtering or missing. The witness turned onto a nearby street, heading toward the high school, and observed the airplane turn its wings at an angle when it crashed into the roof. But remember, it hit the tree first, so he might have not had good control by that point. So the question here is, did he stall, spin, or did he still have control of the airplane? He was just trying to avoid hitting something there. A current copy of the aircraft's weight and balance, which would include empty weight of the airplane, was not located. Now, again, everything burned. They recovered a lot of the contents of the airplane, a lot of different paperwork. This guy was an ATF agent. There was a lot of ammunition on the airplane that cooked off for quite a while. Found several guns in his luggage, and they found some other documents, but they didn't find the weight and balance. So, it might have been there, it might not. If it wasn't there, that's, to me, is something to look at, because that, it's supposed to be there, right? The pilot's operating handbook stated demonstrated crosswind component of 17 knots, and as we saw earlier, the runway 11 crosswind component was 25 to 32 knots. So if he remembered that, not a limitation, but it's a good personal limitation to have, probably even lower than that for most guys. But if he knew about it, he certainly ignored it, because he took off with a real strong gusty crosswind. Stand by just 1 second. I want to check something. Okay. The POH further states, performance information derived by extrapolation beyond the limits of the charts should not be used for flight planning purposes. So if it isn't on the chart, don't use it. Don't try to extrapolate. Don't try to figure it out. Review of the manufacturer's supplied flaps up and 25-degree flaps takeoff performance charts revealed that the weather conditions present at the time of the accident exceeded the chart's performance parameters. As a result, takeoff performance calculations were not determined. The data was off the chart. Using the manufacturer's gear up and gear down performance calculation charts and the reported weather condition and maximum gross weight of the airplane, the climb performance with the gear in the down position was calculated to be about 90 feet a minute. So the book said the airplane should have been able to climb about 90 feet a minute with the gear down. With the gear up, it was calculated to be 410 feet per minute. Now that 410 feet per minute, by the way, if you look at an instrument departure procedure, the climb gradient required at about 120 knot ground speed, as I recall, is about 400 feet per minute to clear any obstacle out there in the departure path. So if he had the gear up, even at this high density altitude, he should have been able to climb. If he had the gear down, never got it up, maybe he would have been barely able to climb, but again, this is book data, new airplane, test pilot, all that kind of stuff, and this is an old airplane. Remanufactured engine or overhauled engine, but might not have been performing as well as a brand new engine back when the airplane was produced. Still in the analysis here, the distance from the departure end of runway 11 to the crash site was 0.96 statute miles, so a little less than a mile. He was struggling in ground effect to get that airplane to perform for him. And I can just visualize that. Got my family on the airplane. I just took off. The airplane's not climbing like I was hoping it would. I'm trying to fly it in ground effect and get it going fast enough to get it out of ground effect. I'm dodging things that are sticking up in the way, losing performance every time I do that, and just trying to get high enough to clear the highest thing out there in my departure path. Be a pretty tight situation. Again, his first identified point of contact, the NTSB calls it, was that tree on the campus of the high school, and its elevation, they went out and checked it, was 7,045 feet MSL. That was where he hit the tree, that 7,045. The departure end of runway 11 is at 7,042 feet. So his net gain in altitude after takeoff was 3 feet. Examination of the recovered airframe and flight control system components revealed no evidence of pre-impact mechanical malfunction. Examination of the recovered engine system components revealed no evidence of pre-impact mechanical malfunction. CAMI out at Oak City, FAA, performed toxicology tests on the pilot and found no carbon monoxide, cyanide, volatiles, or drugs. So evidently he wasn't impaired by any of those things, although it could have been impaired by stress, could have been impaired by fatigue, other things will impair you besides drugs and alcohol and so forth. The NTSB's probable cause that they issued, the pilot's operation of the aircraft outside of the manufacturer's specified performance limitations, which resulted in the pilot's failure to maintain clearance from buildings and terrain during initial takeoff climb. In other words, the density altitude got him. All right, well, let's see if we can identify some of the links in the error chain that led to this accident. And to do that, I'm going to use the technique we used in the last webinar where we use what we call a whiteboard, but to do that here in this situation, I just use a Word document. So there's our whiteboard. So I'm going to open up the roster, and I'd like to ask you to contribute your thinking on links in the error chain that led to this accident. Just raise your hand if you have identified a link and you'd like to share it with us. Well, either you all have gone to sleep or gone out to watch television. Okay, here's Paul Galuzzo. Paul, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Go right ahead.
I would say exceeding the crosswind component for the POH.
Okay, very good. I would say I'd agree with you on that, Paul, 100%.
I would say I agree with you on that, Paul, 100%.
Okay, I'm going to close your mic. We're getting some feedback. And I see a couple of things here. It was not only that gusty crosswind probably added to his takeoff run, surprised him probably, get a lot longer run than he thought since he didn't bother himself to check performance. But also it shows that he's disregarding proper procedures, and that's always a big caution and warning light that there's a link in an error chain happening. Okay, Robert Nebgen. Robert, your mic is open. Can you hear me? Robert, your mic is open. Okay, we're not getting you. Sometimes that happens, Robert. I apologize. How about Robert Slack? Robert, your mic is open.
Yes, I'm here. One of the things that needs to be looked at is, and I don't know what his destination was, if this was a sightseeing and a return, whatever the destination was, that needed to be considered along with the density altitude when he loaded the fuel. Did he need that much fuel?
Yeah, I agree. That's a good observation.
That was my consideration.
Right. Thank you, Robert. I've closed your mic so we don't get the feedback. That's very good, and that's a good point. In fact, it's not only talking about or indicating that it was the heavier weight was a link in the error chain. It's also showing that his disregard for proper flight planning is another link in that error chain. So very good. How about anybody else have, here's Steve Acerbi. Steve, I've opened up your mic. Go ahead.
Hey, Dave, this one's sort of perplexing for me. I do agree with the other guys with the crosswind component and the fuel may not have been needed. But was there recovered at the wreckage? Did he have the gear and flaps still down? Did he clean up the aircraft?
That's a good question, but it wasn't in the report. I don't know why not. You would think that'd be very important. Maybe they couldn't determine it. Usually they can. So I don't have the answer for that, Steve.
Well, that'd be something, to ponder. But other than that, did he have too much fuel and he exceeded the crosswind? It didn't look like it was too high and hot. Based on the performance numbers, did it?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to close your mic, Steve, just to avoid the feedback. Yeah, recall that the NTSB determined that they looked at that takeoff performance data, the chart, and the note on there, and the notes are extremely important. A lot of guys brush by the notes that are always on performance charts, but they'll get you if you don't know they're there and heed them. But the note on the chart said, do not use the chart. You can't compute performance if the data falls off the chart. And in this case, the density altitude of 9,700 feet was way off the chart, so he couldn't compute anything. So therefore, he shouldn't have taken off if he had gone to the chart. So in that aircraft configuration, you're absolutely right. If the gear was still down, or if he had 25 flaps, that was probably why he couldn't get out of ground effect. It would have been a nice piece for us to have here to analyze this, but that's a good point, Steve. Okay, anybody else have any links in the error chain that they identified? Okay, I've got Jeffrey Shalakis. Jeffrey, your mic is open.
Thank you. Dave, one of the other things I think you didn't consider was the slope of the runway itself.
Yes, very good.
Particularly with the density, altitude, and his weight, which, while it was not excessive, would have probably made that slope a bigger problem than it would have normally been.
Exactly. Very good. And I mentioned that on the AOPA airport directory that I showed you the screenshot of gives you the slope of the runway. That's around other publications, but that's the quick way to get it. That's where I go look for it. And any kind of an upslope, degrades performance. On big airplanes, you have a way to compensate for the slope. There is lines in the charts and the graphs that you can move to account for slope, upslope and downslope. In light aircraft, I don't think I've ever seen any data for upslope and downslope. So when you get an upslope, you don't know how that's affecting your performance in these light airplanes. You just know that it is. So that would be, in this case, he had the high density altitude, gusty crosswind, which was not a good headwind, which degrades the runway performance, and he had the upslope. So he had all kinds of things that were working against him here. So that's a good catch on that one, is the runway slope. All right, let me just scroll through again and see if anybody else. Here's Larry Wilson. Larry, your mic is open.
Yeah, I was just wondering, was 1-1 the only, he couldn't go the other way?
2-9, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess he could have, since it was pretty much.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the other runway, I think it was 321 or whatever that was closed for, that was the long one, it was closed for construction. So he had to use 1129. Now, it was a pretty much direct crosswind, and he might have been able to use 29. So at least, it looked like it was flatter out that way. He wasn't going over town, so that would have been a better consideration, and probably a link.
And he also didn't know anything about the airport. He had not checked NOTAMs or I'm sorry, not NOTAMs, but he didn't know anything about the conditions at the airport.
Correct. Yeah.
Must not have known that runway was going to be closed. And
or at least, when did he find out it was closed? Was it after he got there, or did he know about it before? And you're right. If he had known about it before, I've closed your mic, Larry, so don't get feedback. If we had known about it before, then he might have considered not using that as the fuel stop if he'd looked at any kind of performance figure. So very good. That's a good one, Larry. All right, I'm going to scroll through again here a little bit more. Stephen Fisher. Stephen, I've opened up your mic. Okay, I don't hear you, Stephen, so close that again. Sometimes that's just the hookup, doesn't work. All right, I don't see any more hands up. Oh, here's one more. Dean Cap. Dean, go ahead. Dean, did you have a comment? Okay, don't hear you, Dean, so I'm going to close your mic. I see a couple more here. Let me give you a chance to share with us what you're looking at. Bill Menzel. Bill?
It would have been good if he had planned a point where he would reject the takeoff if he hadn't achieved a good flying. There you go. Abort point would have been good.
Exactly. Very good. That would have been, again, a part of his pre-flight planning. It would have shown he was thinking clearly about everything, but obviously he wasn't. Okay, Chad Lastly. Chad, your mic is open. Okay, not getting any audio from Chad. Let me just scroll through one more time. These are all good. I'm glad you guys are thinking about this. You're coming up with good. You're doing very well at identifying these links in the air chain. This is how we do it. But, of course, it should be done before the first takeoff. Okay, I'm sorry if I missed anybody there, but I think I tried to open up mics for everybody. So that was some very good identification. Let me go back to the PowerPoint presentation. And let's take a look at some of these issues that we've identified, some of these links and maybe some others here, as we use our prism of the current airmanship model to look at this accident. First of all, let's look at the three bedrock principles: discipline, skill, and proficiency. This pilot, to me, didn't appear to have very much flight discipline. The FAR say that we're supposed to do takeoff performance calculations for every takeoff. Well, 99.9% of the time, especially if you're flying around this part of the country and you're always flying with way under gross weight and so forth, we have a tendency not to do that. But the regs say we're supposed to, and good flight discipline tells you should, because even if you it isn't needed. Even if you're well, in this case, well within performance, you need to check it in case you get into a situation where your assumption was wrong and you're outside the performance envelope of the airplane. So that's part of flight discipline. So this pilot exhibited very poor flight discipline. Had he been practicing Airmanship 2.0, he would have been displaying discipline, and that accident probably would not have happened. Skill. He obviously had a lot of time. He had quite a bit of time recently in the airplane, so I would think that his proficiency in normal maneuvers, just driving the airplane around, was probably okay. But if he was like most personal flyers, he had little to no recurrent training. You know that. And I'm sorry to tell you, but in my humble opinion, the 2-year flight review is not recurrent training. It's a joke if you want to think of it as recurrent training. Recurrent training would take place every 90 days, every 6 months, every year, but certainly not every 2 years. But he didn't probably have his skills sharpened well enough to fly that airplane out of ground effect. I have, when I was in my younger days and got myself into situations like this, at one time I got into a flying out of ground effect situation, a hot summer day up in Michigan, and I had to fly it very precisely to get the airplane to perform to get out of ground effect. At that time, I was a real active flight instructor. That year, I flew over 1,000 hours of instructing time, so my skills were sharp. His probably weren't sharp in those kinds of flying skills, flying in ground effect, getting the airplane out of there. And so I think that's probably, if you were in practicing Airmanship 2.0, he would have practiced skills like that, so he had them when he needed them. We talked about proficiency. He was probably proficient, but remember, our skills deteriorate very rapidly, and there's nothing we can do about it. The only thing that we can do about it is to practice the skills and get them back up there to proficiency level. So if you have your own airplane and you only have to take a flight review once every 2 years, and that's really not a big check on your skills, then you have a tendency, we all do, to let our skills deteriorate. We keep them sharp in the skills that we're practicing, which is, as I call, driving the airplane, not in all these other things that we should be skillful at. All right, let's look at knowledge of self, 5 pillars of knowledge. Did this pilot have knowledge of self? Well, I can see a couple of ways here that he probably didn't. He let external pressures get on him. He wanted to get up to the Grand Canyon. I think part of the external pressures was the fact that he was not allowed to fly at night. He had a restriction on his medical, so he wanted to get up there before dark. He was up at 7,000 feet. We are impaired at that altitude from lack of oxygen to some extent, which impairs our thinking. So he wasn't very knowledgeable about himself. Knowledge of aircraft, well, he might have known about that airplane back when he bought it, but, if he knew his airplane well, he would know those performance charts, and he would know that even without looking at him, if he was at a 9,700-foot density altitude, that he was off the chart. Team, I'm sorry, let me back this up. There we go. Team, knowledge of team. He didn't really seem to have much of a team around him. It was pretty much a lone operator there. Knowledge of environment. He seemed to be oblivious to that density altitude issue, even though on the AWOS, the automatic report was saying density altitude 9,700 feet. And then, of course, the big one here, pillar of knowledge, was he even really aware of that risk, that lack of performance of the airplane and inability to fly on a ground effect. So did he know his risks? And, of course, all of those things led to real poor situational awareness and then lack of judgment. He even attempted the takeoff. The Air Safety Institute recommends that you compute your takeoff performance required, runway required, or distance over the 50-foot obstacle, and then you increase it by 50% as just a normal procedure. And I heartily concur with that recommendation because airplanes don't perform as they get older like they do when they're new. We don't fly like the test pilots flew it when it was brand new. And things don't happen. We don't react as fast as the test pilots did and so forth. So we need to be practicing all of these elements of the current airmanship model to make sure we're doing it right. The other thing that I see here, that if this pilot had been practicing Airmanship 2.0, he would have been part of a safety culture. That's a key element of Airmanship 2.0, is belonging to a safety culture, an aviation safety culture. And the safety culture needs to have a safety management system. That's a very important part of any aviation safety culture. So we looked at how a safety management system is structured, how it can work earlier in that bonus case study. But let's apply that, look at the safety management system here in this analysis and see how that might have saved this guy's bacon. First of all, safety management system incorporates a formal flight risk assessment process, a tool, a system, people, and I use what's called a FRAT, Flight Risk Assessment Tool, before every flight. AOPA has one online that's usable, not the greatest, but what it does is it gets you to identify and look at and consider all the normal risks, all the known risks, all the risks we normally can see on every flight or potentially see, and identify them, look at them, assess them, and then if they're there at a high enough level, the risk at a high enough level, we can find ways to remove it or mitigate it. Also, if he was practicing Airmanship 2.0, he would have had thorough pre-flight planning because he would have been operating with an operations center, we call it an ops center, with a FAA licensed dispatch team and SkyDesk representatives and flight ops support and maintenance support. So he's not out there alone. In this case, he was. He didn't have any backup. And the part of that safety management system would have been a policy that the flight will not depart unless the pilot in command and the dispatch team agree that the flight is safe. In this case, the dispatch team would have, by virtue of their normal procedures, computed the takeoff performance required and found that he couldn't take off from that runway that day, and they then would not have released the flight, so it would have prevented the accident. And that's the shared decision making. In my opinion, after really studying this stuff now for the last 3 years or so, how do we get safer? How do we make ourselves safer so that we're our families and our friends and the folks that fly with us are safer and have a better time? And a big part of it is shared decision making. I think about 80% of the private flying accidents happen because of poor go, no-go decisions. And if you are using a system that Airmanship 2.0 uses of that shared decision making, we don't make these big decisions like go, no, go all by ourselves. We have a team around us to help us make the decisions. So that's how we can use the current airmanship model and the safety management system incorporated in Airmanship 2.0 to analyze this accident, and how, if he had been practicing Airmanship 2.0, here are just a few of the reasons why it wouldn't have happened. Okay. Well, that's the analysis. Very good response. So I'm going to put everybody's hands down now, or hit that button. So if you have any questions or comments here before we wrap it up this evening, here's your chance. So just raise your hand if you have a question or a comment, and I'm going to give you a couple of seconds while I take a sip of water to decide whether or not you want to raise your hand. Okay, Dean Cap. Dean, your mic is open. Okay, Dean, I'm not hearing you. I guess it's not working. Close your mic. See if anybody else has their hand up. Larry Wilson, is your hand up again, or was it still up? Larry?
Yeah.
No,
I was just wondering if, obviously there was no evidence that this guy had had any mountain flying experience.
Good point, Larry. In fact, we should have caught that earlier on the as one of the links, because that happens to a lot of us flatlanders, doesn't it? Every summer, 3 or 4 guys from Chicago go out west and get themselves in trouble because it's not in our normal habit patterns to even consider that density altitude issue. So that's another good point. Yes, Larry, that was a link in the air chain. That's a good one. Anybody else have any questions or comments in general or about the case study in itself before we move on here? Okay, I don't see any other hands up. Oh, here we go. Chad Lastly. Chad, I'm going to try your mic again. Are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Hey, loud and clear, Chad. Go ahead.
Okay, I think my just question was instrument rated and night flight restriction. Where does that go? Do we know what the night restriction was for?
It was for a vision problem. He actually had restriction for no night flying and no flying. I forget how they state it, but he had color blindness. But he did a demonstrated ability waiver. He took an FAA guy out and flew him around and saw and looked at the light gun, tower light gun, so he was able to get that removed from his certificate. So that's all I can tell you about that restriction. It just said no night flight. Okay. Anybody? I'm going to put all the hands down again. So if hit that raise your hand icon if you have a comment or a question. I'm going to scroll through one last time here before we move on. Okay. Don't see any more hands up. Very good. All right, I've got a couple of questions for you here, just 5 of them. Some poll questions. This is kind of a how goes it. I'd like to get some feedback from you on how these webinars are working for you. So bear with me here just for a minute while I launch these. I've got to do a couple of things to do it right. And there it is. That's the first poll question. Do you find the Airmanship 2.0 case studies to be useful? Yes or no? Some of you are still answering, so I'm going to give it a little bit more time. Looks like a few more still to answer. Getting close. I get a percentage here of how many have voted. I very seldom get 100% voting, but I usually get in the high 90s. We're up to 81% right now, so I'll give it just another few seconds here. All right, seems to be topping out about 83, so I will close that poll and share the answer with you. And here we had 98% of you say yes and 2% say no. So very good. I'm gratified for that feedback. Got another question for you here. How many Airmanship 2.0 case study webinars have you attended? Now, I know you probably can't remember exactly if you attended more than one, but just try to pick the range here that most closely fits your recollection of how many of these webinars out of the 11 now that you've attended. Okay, a little quicker response on the voting. Looks like it's topped out. I'm going to close it and share the results with you. So about 44%, only this one, about a third of you, 2 or 3, 16%, 4 to 6, and 7 to 11. Very good. So I've noticed that. I just wanted to get some data, but I've noticed we have a lot of repeat customers here, and again, I appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to hide that. Got a couple more for you here. Do you recommend the Airmanship 2.0 case study series to your friends? So if you've been attending them, have you told other pilots about it? Okay, still some folks are still putting their answers in. Looks like we have a few more abstentions this time, so I think it's topped out. I'm going to close it, share the results with you. 73% say yes and 27 no. So very good. Well, thank you. And that's really important because sharing this stuff with the other pilots around is not only good for them, it's good for you because if we can get everybody practicing Airmanship 2.0, it's going to be a lot safer out there for all of us, a lot more fun for all of us. So, okay, I'm going to hide that, and I think I've got, 2 more real quickly for you here. Do you intend to attend future Airmanship 2.0 case study webinars? Still a couple of answers coming in. Okay, I think we've topped out. Close it. Share the results with you. 100% say yes. Wow, that's great. Thank you. Okay, one more. Have you yet visited the Center for Airmanship Excellence website? Have you been over there to look at any of this Airmanship 2.0 stuff yet? Okay, looks like it's topped out on the voting. I'll share the results with you. 28% say yes, and 73% no. So again, I point it's all free, all the information over there. They're primarily video briefings, easy to go through. I know there's a lot of them, but you know, pick what the topic that looks the most interesting to you, and go through them, because you'll get a great benefit from the information contained in those briefings. Okay, I'm going to hide that. Thank you very much for that feedback. That helps us a lot in planning the future webinars. Okay, here are some recommended next steps I'd suggest you take. If you're interested in finding out more about Airmanship 2.0, register for the Airmanship updates at the airmanshipexcellence.org website. They're free. You'll be updated on different events, happenings, airmanship things. Excuse me. Look for the Wings Program briefings that you've missed, the other case studies, and there are other Wings Program briefings in a different series here that are at the website. You can view them for free. View the Airmanship 2.0 briefings at the airmanshipexcellence.org that I mentioned. You might want to subscribe to my hangar, Captain Dave's Hangar. That's my blog. We only talk about airmanship. I'm not like most old captains where I'll get on there and talk about politics and so forth and ball scores. It's just about airmanship. Keep your eyes open for the Airmanship 2.0, the next one, case study. I'm going to take a couple of months off here. After all, I am supposed to be retired, and it is summer. So the next case study will be in September. So watch your inbox for the SPANS announcement from the FAA about that one. And I'd like to encourage you, in the meantime, to start spreading the word about Airmanship 2.0. Well, thank you very much for your attending this evening. Contact me with any questions or comments you may think of afterwards. This is a good number. It's not staffed, but there's voicemail on it, and you can always leave a message for me there. And or you can reach me via email, and there's a good email address, but there's a link on the website for contact, so you can do that too. And I'd like to point out that it looks like my fix that I implemented for the loss of audio due to pilot error worked, because I don't think that I lost audio outbound, at least from this end, at all this evening, based on the fact that nobody put their hand up. So again, thanks for attending, and I'll leave you with one last thought. Fly safely.